Do you condemn Donald Trump for pardoning neo-Nazis, violent criminals, people who assaulted 140 police officers on January the 6th?
One last real clarification.
He won't answer.
One last real clarification.
I'll ask again.
No,
it's a simple question. Do you support pardoning the 600 people who were charged with assaulting police officers?
Did he pardon them for
like
pedophilia?
Daniel
Okay,
Rodriguez? He pardoned them for assaulting police.
Oh,
do you support that?
All right.
Okay.
Do you support that?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Glad to have you here today. In this one, we are watching a fiery exchange between Mehdi Hassan and Michael at what looks like an Ivy League debate, and the topic gets seriously intense. They are going back and forth on whether the former president actually upheld the Constitution during his second term, and the conversation drifts into one of the most heated moments of the entire night when Mehdi starts pressing Michael with a question he absolutely refuses to answer. You are going to want to see how this plays out because the silence speaks louder than anything either of them say out loud. Stick around all the way through because the back half is where everything really unravels, and you do not want to miss the moment Michael runs out of places to hide. Also, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are tuning in from today. I genuinely love seeing how far this little corner of the internet reaches. All right, let's get into it.
Great.
New chair?
Yeah, so thank you guys so much for coming today. A lot of the conversation circulated particularly around Trump's second term activities. I was just curious to the question of not whether Trump upheld the Constitution with regards to January 6th, but did he uphold constitutional norms?
Great question.
Is that for any one of us in particular?
Particularly you, Michael, but either of you could go
I'd love
at
to
it.
answer after Michael.
Sure,
Do
yeah.
2 minutes and 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure thing. Yes, he did. Again, I'm not convincing anyone that they should love the horn hat guy. That's not the basis on which you're voting this evening. But there is a great precedent for contested elections in the United States. In fact, that's what the 12th Amendment is about. We've had a number of contested elections. Obviously, 1860, the election of Lincoln, the Rutherford v. Hayes, which resulted in the Compromise of 1876. Bush v. Gore, Al Gore refused to concede for months after that, and there were some riotous events. So what occurred at the Capitol on January 6th was very unfortunate, though it's been much lied about. It's worth pointing out that the only person who was killed in political violence that day was a Trump supporter who was killed by a trigger-happy cop. There's also a special irony to Democrats complaining about January 6th as the worst day in the history of this or any republic, because not only was it not the worst political violence in American history, it wasn't the worst political violence of that year. It followed the little-prosecuted BLM riots that very same year, where Kamala Harris and staffers for Joe Biden actually bailed the rioters out of jail. But there's a greater irony, which is that there have been 5 or 6, depending on how you score it, attacks on the Capitol in American history. Virtually all of them have been perpetrated by radical leftists, a Marxist Harvard professor, Harvardman, of course. But then one in 1971 was perpetrated by Bill Ayers of the Weather Underground. Bill Ayers, in whose living room Barack Obama launched his political career. So it's very unfortunate that took place on January 6th. It's unfortunate that there were questions about the 2020 election, questions which arose because the election rules were radically changed in the weeks and months before the election, in some cases unconstitutionally, as in the case of mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. It's also a bit strange that Nancy Pelosi took responsibility for not having sufficient security at the Capitol that day. She did that on camera. It was actually a film that her daughter made. You can easily go look it up. And it's very strange that some of the Capitol Police gave the leaders of the insurrection private tours of the Capitol, notably the aforementioned horn hat guy. But regardless, it's a great pity that it took place. I hope it doesn't take place again. And unfortunately, it's also not totally out of the norm for the United States, going back at least to the middle of the 19th century.
You have to understand something right out the gate. The moment a guy stands on a debate stage and tells you the violent mob that smashed through the Capitol was actually not a big deal, you are watching someone perform a magic trick in real time. And the magic trick is this. He wants you to look at his hand waving in the air while his other hand quietly rewrites history. Michael walks up there and says the only person killed that day was a supporter shot by a, in his words, trigger-happy cop. Are you kidding me? That's the framing? Out of every fact you could pull from that day, out of every officer who got beaten, every staffer hiding under desks, every member of Congress evacuated, the one detail he wants you to remember is that an officer made a split-second decision while a mob was breaking down a door. That tells you everything about the project here. The project is not honesty. The project is sympathy laundering. And then he goes further. He says it was not the worst political violence in American history. It was not even the worst political violence of that year. Excuse me? Comparing a coordinated attack on the legislative branch to street protests is not a serious comparison. One is regular civil unrest, messy, sometimes destructive, the kind of thing every democracy deals with. The other is a deliberate attempt to stop the certification of a presidential election. Those are not the same category. You can disagree with both, condemn both, and still understand that one of them targeted the literal machinery of self-government. That's the distinction he refuses to make because making it would collapse his whole argument. And then comes my favorite line. He says Capitol Police, in his words, gave the leaders of the insurrection private tours. Wait, so he just called them the leaders of the insurrection. That's his language. Then, in the same breath, he tells you it was not really that bad and not really out of the norm going back to the 19th century. Pick a lane, my friend. You cannot say it was an insurrection led by leaders and also say it was a normal Tuesday. This is the contradiction that runs through the entire defense.
So glad you asked that question because January 6th hadn't come up and it was a big issue from Trump's end of his first term. Mike Pence, we talked about Mike Pence, who Michael's a fan
Why does
of.
Mike Pence keep coming up?
Because you're a fan of his, and he was the vice president who didn't endorse the president for another term because he said he made me do unconstitutional stuff. He wanted me to violate my constitutional oath. That's from Mike Pence's testimony. You want to dismiss it because you know there's comeback for it. You cite Al Gore. Al Gore never incited an insurrection. There is no precedent for January 6th. We were used to peaceful transfers of power. Richard Nixon agreed, even though he's probably robbed by JFK. Al Gore agreed, even though he's probably robbed by George W. Bush. Donald Trump actually lost, for sure, and he still didn't accept it and incited a riot. Michael says, oh, Democrats thought it was the worst day in history. Do you know who said, bar none, it was the most horrifying day in American politics in my lifetime?
Mike Pence.
No.
I don't know. You
Guess
kept quoting
again.
him, so I assume.
Guess again. It was Ben Shapiro on January the 7th. He said it was the most horrifying day that I witnessed in American politics. Noted Democrat
But
Ben
I always
Shapiro said
disagree
that,
with that guy.
on January the 7th. So let's just deal with some facts here. The people who attacked the Capitol were not going on private tours. They were not just a horn hat guy. It was people like Daniel Rodriguez, who assaulted Michael Fanone, put him in a stroke, got 12 years in prison. The judge said he was an army of hate and violence. Donald Trump pardoned him. It was people like Andrew Paul Johnson, who was just sentenced to life in prison for sexually abusing 2 children in Florida. Donald Trump pardoned him for January the 6th. He pardoned a neo-Nazi called Bradley Tyler Dykes, who did a Sikh Heil salute as he attacked police officers. These are the people Trump pardoned. Michael has never condemned Trump for that. Harry Sisson asked Michael on his show earlier this year, would you condemn Donald Trump for doing that? And he wouldn't answer the question. He said, I'll never condemn Donald Trump. Do you condemn Donald Trump for pardoning neo-Nazis, domestic abusers, pedophiles?
Well, hold on. Was he one of...
Do you condemn Trump for pardoning?
I'm just asking a clarifying question about that guy. Was he one of the neo-Nazis who was getting $3 million from the SPLC, or was he a different neo-Nazi?
Nice diversion. I'm not Harry Sisson. I'll use up my time. Do you condemn Donald Trump for pardoning neo-Nazis, violent criminals, people who assaulted 140 police officers on January the 6th?
One last real clarification.
He won't answer.
One last real clarification.
I'll ask again.
Do
you? No, it's a simple question. Do you support pardoning the 600 people who were charged with assaulting police officers?
Pardon them for
like Daniel
pedophilia?
Rodriguez? He pardoned them for assaulting police.
Oh,
do you support that?
All right.
Do you support that?
All right.
3 times he hasn't answered.
Stick to the 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute.
Do you condemn Donald Trump for pardoning 600 people who assaulted police officers? 4th time. Can you do it?
I'm happy to. I condemn pedophilia,
do you condemn
neo-Nazism.
Donald Trump for pardoning January 6th rioters? He won't do it. He will not do it.
This is where the entire room shifts, because Mehdi does something so simple and so devastating. He just asks a question, and he keeps asking it, and the silence that follows tells you more than any argument ever could. Watch what happens. Mehdi brings up the former vice president, the man who is 1 heartbeat away from the presidency, the man who served loyally for 4 years, and he points out that this vice president declined to endorse his own boss because, in Mehdi's words, he said he made me do unconstitutional stuff. Think about how extraordinary that is. A loyal number 2, a deeply conservative man, looks at his former boss and says, "No, thank you. That is not a partisan opinion. That is a witness statement from inside the room." And then Mehdi pulls the rug out with one name, Ben Shapiro. He quotes Shapiro saying, "Bar none, it was the most horrifying day in American politics in my lifetime." Ben Shapiro. Not a progressive, not someone Michael can wave away, The conservative voice his own audience listens to said the same thing liberals were saying, and the look on Michael's face when that lands is everything. But the moment that broke this debate, the moment that I think everyone in that room will remember, is when Mehdi asks the simplest question in the world. Do you condemn the pardons of bad actors who attacked police officers? That's it. That's the whole question. Here's what people don't realize. A normal commentator, anyone with a functioning conscience, says yes. Of course. It costs you nothing. You can still support the broader movement, you just say the obvious thing. Yes, attacking police is bad. Yes, the worst offenders should stay locked up. One sentence. That's all it takes. And he could not say it. 4 times. Mehdi asks 4 times. And 4 times, Michael dodges, deflects, changes the subject, asks weird clarifying questions about a guy he just heard about. That is not a debate tactic. That is a confession.
Excuse me, we have a debate format. We're going to stick to the debate format. We're not going to
I made my
ask.
point.
Mehdi doesn't
I
want to
made my
stick to
point.
the debate.
We're
You don't
going
wanna
to stick
answer the
to the
question.
debate format.
You don't want to answer the question, my friend.
I'm happy to answer on the substance if you'd
If
like.
you
me.
would like
but
to,
he
you
won't
have
answer my
1 minute to
question.
respond
Yeah,
however you
so
choose.
obviously, Mehdi's being very, very dishonest. President Trump didn't pardon anybody for pedophilia or
Just
Nazism
for
or whatever
assaulting police
nonsense.
officers.
If you'll allow me to finish. So what he pardoned them for is because there was a massive prosecution of thousands of people on January 6th that was politically motivated, that was disproportionate because the federal government had let all of the leftist rioters who, unlike the January 6thers, killed dozens of people and it resulted in over $1 billion worth of property damage, let them off the hook and in fact raised money to bail them out of jail. And so because of the unjust prosecutions where you had Midwestern grannies who were not pedophiles or Nazis, but who were eccentric ladies
What about
who walked
the
around,
violent
ones? No interruption.
who walked around the Capitol despite all of the lies suggesting the police officers were killed. If that was not true, the coroners proved that. So he recognized that there was disproportionate prosecution. The same goes for the pro-life grannies who were arrested by Joe Biden, who were imprisoned for praying at abortion clinics. President Trump pardoned them. Now, on the pardon power, look, there are lots of bad pardons that go on. Joe Biden took it to an egregious degree, but the pardon power is absolute. And if we're here to defend the Constitution, we would have to defend the plain words of Article 2, which say the president has the pardon power.
And here is the part that blows my mind. When Michael finally gets a minute to respond, he starts by saying the former president did not pardon anybody for serious crimes, in his words, or whatever, or whatever. That's how he ends the sentence, about people convicted of the most serious offenses imaginable, or whatever. That is the level of seriousness this defense brings to the conversation. That dismissive little phrase at the end is a confession all by itself, because when someone is forced to defend the indefensible, the language gets vague on purpose. It gets soft. It trails off, because saying the actual words out loud would make the defense impossible. And then he reaches for the most ridiculous lifeline in modern political commentary. The Midwestern grandma defense. He says these were just eccentric ladies who walked around the Capitol. Let me break down why this matters, because the pardon list does not contain only those people. It contains people convicted of seditious conspiracy. It contains people who put officers in the hospital. You don't get to point at the gentlest face in the crowd and pretend that face represents the whole crowd. That is sleight of hand. It is the oldest debate trick in the book, and it should not work on anyone who is paying attention. And here is the part that ties the whole evening together. Michael admits there are, in his words, lots of bad pardons that go on. Did you catch that? He just confessed. He just said it. So which is it? Are they all just grannies? Or are some of them bad pardons? You cannot have it both ways. The mask slipped, and underneath it is just a man who knows the truth and refuses to say it out loud. And that is the takeaway from this entire exchange. Not that one side won and one side lost, but that one side could speak plainly about what happened, and the other side had to bury the truth under euphemisms and dismissive shrugs. When you have to use the phrase or whatever to defend your position, you have already lost the argument. You just have not admitted it yet. So, what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.